everybody. Untold Radio Network Studios here with Pine Island Research. It is Monday night, June 5th, 2023. Hope everybody's doing well. Everybody's piling into the viewership, and the chat is flying by. That's awesome. Just got done watching Joe's show. Interesting show he did with Brent Dill and Leon Thompson talking about the latest hoax that's out there. And well, I'll tell you what, they've been on a roll lately. It feels like you could do a show every day on the hoax of the day right now. It is crazy. But it's and you know what, maybe you don't feel it so much when you're watching some of these shows, but you go into those big groups on Facebook and it's just the subject matter is dominated by the latest faked pictures, and it's nauseating, to be honest with you. It is just unbelievable. And we're just at the beginning, folks. Just wait, the AI train is coming, baby. It's gonna get crazy ride. So turn your common sense dial up to 10, all the way up. Don't feather it back. No, don't hold back. Turn all the way to 10. Turn on the dual power amps. Get the common sense blowing out there, man, because that's what it's gonna take right now. But I'm glad to say we had a great morning this morning on Coffee Time. Shared some videos and different news stories with you guys, and it was fun reading the comments and hearing from everybody. Loved playing the old school Thomas Steenberg video interview with him that he did with the CBC back in the, it must have been the early 80s, maybe mid 80s, probably early 80s, very early 80s, I think. And you want to see a good looking fella when he was that young. I'll tell you what, he was in it to win it. And I really just thought it was a great representation of kind of that historical reference of where were we at 45 years ago in this search for answers. But and where are we at now? Not a whole lot further down the road than we were then. But you know, I think the tables are tilting a little bit. Technology is on our side, and everything's advancing. A lot of talk lately about DNA, something I wrote about in my book on a project that I've got coming up, a different approach to DNA. But we're going to have Darby Orcutt on next week on Monday night. He's, now that LMS2 is funded, just to be clear, Darby's DNA project with North Carolina State is not funded by LMS2. They're not connected physically. They're two separate projects that are running parallel to each other. So, and it's exciting that they're able to do it at the same time. But it'll be interesting. But we're going to have Darby on next week on Monday night. We'll talk about a little bit. But tonight we got David Wilbanks on, and I'm excited to talk to him. A lot of different reasons. One, because I like his channel, and I like the way he approaches the subject. But I also like the fact that he owns a music store because I collect guitars, and so we were just talking about guitars and music here before we came on the air, but I won't waste any more time. Let's pull him up here. Hey, David, how are you tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I was watching Joe's show with Leon and Brent, and they were talking about the latest craze on the hoaxing forefront, and it's just, you can't help but smile and try to stay upbeat after you think about that stuff, because what's our choice,
Well, I mean, if you're going to hoax, don't use the Jack Link Sasquatch. You're going to get caught. Right?
We talk about AI. Honestly, some of these guys really need AI because their creative juices just don't flow that much, do they?
Oh my goodness.
No, I agree. It's you gotta expand your hoaxing vision if you're gonna hoax past the Jack Link's commercial that basically everyone
And
has seen. So
it makes you miss folks like Ivan Marks that would at least go to the trouble to make a whole Sasquatch. And
yeah, right. I mean, you got to start before 9 a.m. in the morning if you're gonna put in a good, honest day of hoaxing.
yeah, I guess so.
I wouldn't use the image of Bigfoot that is probably, other than Patty itself, likely the most referenced image of Bigfoot worldwide in culture, viewed by everybody, whether you're a believer or not, from a commercial campaign. that wouldn't work very well. But anyways, I wanted to have you on. I was just telling you here before we went on the air. Geez, I've had Leon on, I've had Thomas on, I've had so many from the crew on, and I haven't had you on the show yet. And although I think we've probably been on a couple panels together during other people's shows, I really hadn't had a chance to have a real lengthy discussion with you. So I was really excited that you were able to come on.
Mm-hmm.
What tell us a little bit about the music store. I mean, how long have you owned a music store, and how was that a passion that you picked up at a young age, or?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a rock star, and I found out I can do all right selling guitars better than playing them. So anyway, back 31 years ago, I opened up my music shop here in Ada, Oklahoma, and I've been doing it ever since. And I still play sometimes. Every once in a while, I'll get the urge and I'll throw a band together and do some things. The last band I put together in here involved me, the guitar teacher here, and other local musicians, and even my son. He played his first gigs in front of people with me, and I was very proud of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been in the music business for 31 years on my own. I managed another music store for a couple of years before that. Kind of learned the ropes. So yeah, it's been a while. Still haven't got rich selling guitars, but I never dread getting up in the morning and coming to work. I mean, it's like going to a toy store, being surrounded by neat guitars.
Yeah, I never got rich playing guitars, but I didn't stop playing. It was still fun. It's a
Right.
passion, really.
No, it's a lot of fun. And to be clear, I never got rich doing anything else either. But at least,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you. I think that's one of the funnest things about having that as a pastime and a passion is that it doesn't get out of your system. I mean, I'm sitting here at 54 years old, and whenever I call the guy who's a good friend of mine, went to high school together. He played drums in my band when we were in high school and playing in Minneapolis all the time at bars. I'll call him up every now and then and say, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Are we getting the band back together?" Just kind of as a joke, but the thought of doing that never really leaves. It's fun. I'll
oh
have
yeah,
friends of mine that have bands around the area will call me up and say, "Our guitarist is gone. Will you play guitar this weekend?" Whatever. And I don't like the commitment that it takes to do it full time, but I really do enjoy every now and then getting the guitars back out, getting the rig out, and spending the night playing. It's almost relaxing, really, considering.
well, it's such a high when you're playing music and the crowd appreciates what you're doing and gets into it.
Yeah,
That's a real special feeling there.
yeah, and good bands pay attention to that. You notice that? I mean,
Mhm.
there's a group on Facebook of cover bands that these guys share everything with each other. They'll say, "Has anybody ever played these two songs and followed it up with this song? Man, we had a great feedback." And somebody else will say, "Yeah, I've played those songs in the same set before, and it was great." They really pay attention to what crowds respond to. Real good bands do.
Mm-hmm.
So, other than music, let's shift gears over to the Sasquatch mystery. Where did this start for you? Was that at a young age, or did that come later on?
At a very, very young age, actually, and I recognize several people in the chat, so some of them's probably heard this. But when
Yeah.
I was a very young child, my mother worked for a veterinarian who was raised in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, named Dr. Lewis Stiles, and he not a Bigfoot believer, but he was I call a hopeful skeptic. He's passed away, but anyway, you froze for a second. Am I coming through?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. You're still
Oh,
coming
okay.
through.
Your
Oh,
video froze for a second, but anyway, and he had corresponded briefly with Roger Patterson in like, gosh, 1966 or so. It was before the Patterson film, and he had got that book from Roger that Do Abominable Snowmen in America Really Exist. And when I was a little kid, and probably before I could even read, we would go over there, and I knew right where that book was, and I was just fascinated with it, and so that's really where it started. That was what the first I ever heard of Bigfoot was by looking at that book, and then later on, I mean, growing up, every time I was in the woods, I would go out camping in the woods, and I grew up way out in the country, so I'd go camping and hiking by myself a lot, and that was always in my mind. Wouldn't it be neat if there was one of those things around here? And I grew up. Never was afraid of the woods, and then in the I'd probably say the mid 1990s is when I started, and I would have been in my mid to early 20s during that time. I would start paying more attention and going out, and then in the late 90s, I actually forget what year exactly, but I started a website called southernbigfoot.com, and actually had a couple of people from different parts of the state that would help me, if I got reports in from, different areas. One is Shelly Harris. I had her on my show one time, and she would look into things that was out in the, west of Oklahoma City if I got a report in there. And another gentleman named Dan Belda, which he is sadly deceased, but he would look into things in the northeast part of the state. And through that website, I had a gentleman, he was a documentary filmmaker from the UK named Bruce Burgess, sent me an email saying he wanted to make a documentary about Bigfoot sightings in Oklahoma, and if I would be interested in helping out. First, I thought it was just a prank, thing. We're talking when I got the first email from him, it would have been about early 2001. So when I figured out he was for real, I said, sure, I'd be glad to. And he actually flew to Oklahoma in September of 2001. And I took a week off from work and took him all over the places that I could think of that would be good to do the shooting, introduced him to the vast majority of the people that were featured on the documentary, which is called Bigfootville. You can still, and I did not have anything to do with that name. I thought that was the silliest sounding name he could come up with, but he stuck with it, I was like, Bruce, don't call it Bigfootville. He goes, no, he said, I like that. So anyway, I started talking to people who had sent me reports, who I'd grown up with, who had said they had an encounter and stuff. And we actually ended up putting together the groundwork for that documentary. He went back to the UK, got everybody together, and came back in late November, like very late November, and we spent about a week or a little better out in the field shooting all of that. Now, after that was when I started getting loads and loads of reports through my website at that time, and it kind of blew up after that.
Wow. Yeah, Bigfootville, I probably would have been like you. I would have been, don't use that name. But then again, you start realizing sometimes when something's a little bit hokey, it actually catches on even faster. It like actually works in its favor. So you kind of
Who would
wonder,
have thought a band called who would have thought a band named after a bug would have got big? I mean, the
right,
Beatles, you know.
right, right. All kinds of
But,
you think back of the history of band names, it's like somebody had to
right,
have
right.
told them right away, dude, that's a horrible name for a band, and they're like, we're using it anyways, But uh, so you went on to write a pair of books. Which one did you write
Yeah,
first? Now,
the first book I wrote was a fictional book. I had an idea for a story um, that actually came from a dream, just like you have a scary dream. For some people are traumatized by nightmares. I'm just fascinated with them and feel fortunate when I have one, And um, so what I did, the Champay or Champay, I'm not absolutely positive how you pronounce that, but that's a Choctaw. That's a monster in Choctaw folklore that they're not calling it a Bigfoot, but the description of it was like a hairy black ogre like monster that would eat people if it ever
hmm,
crossed paths with them. So I tied that legend into a story about a Bigfoot and put the story in southeast Oklahoma in the Ouachita Mountains. And there are references throughout that book to real sightings, and actually a couple of the fictional encounters in that book are based on um, encounters that I didn't actually investigated. So that was the first one. And
hmm,
then I had been writing down things to write about that were nonfiction, which is Kaimishi Bigfoot investigating the Oklahoma Sasquatch. And it's there's a chapter in it where I share, some reports that people had sent in to me. And there's some longer chapters in there, like talking about me working with the Travel Channel crew and some of the, like one particular area that I have been back to many times because it seems to have the more consistent activity, if you will. And it's not frequented by a lot of people unless they're, in deer season hunting or whatever. But during the off season, I very rarely encounter another person down in this area. It's a valley in the Kaimishi Mountains, and it's kind of hard to get to. You don't accidentally pass through it, and the further you go back into it, you need a um, it needs to be not in the rainy season. I'll put it that way. And you need,
hmm,
an off-road vehicle to really get very deep in. And in that area, there I've got a long chapter about that. That would be ongoing. But basically, that book I share a lot of my experiences and ongoing things as well as like projects I've worked on and such. And I'm working on a kind of a follow up to it, and I'm not in any big hurry on it. I'm just kind of taking my time with it. But anyway, that's my second. That's the one that I still sell, a lot of. That's still selling well on Amazon.
hmm. It's nice to be able to work on a follow up and not feel like you have a timetable. Take your time and just do it, let it progress at its own pace rather than feeling like, well, I have to have 5 more chapters wrote next week. It's like, I just,
Yeah. I've got a friend in a, a Honubby, John Vandeventer, and he has been writing his butt off on books. I mean, they're
yeah.
fictional stories and stuff, but they're very good. And he's got a couple more in the works.
Hmm.
Than me, I've got to be. Um, in the music business, we call it temperamental. And it's that way in music. I've got to be in the mood before I'm creative. Same way
Yeah.
with writing. If I'm not in the mood to write, um, nothing comes out. I've got to be in the right frame of mind where I can just get up early in the morning, nothing to do, sit down at my laptop and drink coffee, relax, and write.
I totally feel that because I think it was 2012, the last band that I was a regular member of, that I'd started this band. I wrote a bunch of music. We went down and recorded it at a pretty high-end studio down in the Houston, the Woodland area of Houston, at a studio called Red Tree Studios. And interestingly, it was my first time in Oklahoma, driving through Oklahoma on the way down there. But when I was getting ready for that year coming up to that, writing 11 songs, you kind of got in that path to where for hours, I mean, some of the best stuff you would write, you could write a whole song in 7 minutes, because it was just there, right? And then other times you sit down and you're thinking, okay, how do I work on this chorus? Where does this, what's the bridge going to look like? And you're just stuck. I can't believe how many times I was out riding my mower and I'm just hearing it in my head. And all of a sudden I'd have to stop and turn off the mower and go run inside to write it down. Cause I knew that if I didn't do it right then, I'd forget it. So
yeah, it's a zone.
I'd be mowing away and turn the mower off and run inside, and my wife would be like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I gotta hurry up and write this lyric down."
I tell you, and this is, it's funny how ideas come at the most inopportune time. Mine is when I'm actively writing, more ideas come to me when I'm in the shower of all places. So I started getting where I would leave a tablet. I'm talking about a paper tablet on the sink beside the shower, and I just shut the water off and write. So I'd have smeared ink and stuff on pages, and when I'd get through the shower, I'd run in there and start typing it and making it make sense, But
my bad.
Yeah, Joe, Joe asked, he said, "You sure you're drinking coffee, David?" Wink, wink. Yes, I am sure. I don't drink. Nothing against somebody having a drink, but I don't.
Yeah. I
never
usually on
developed a taste
Mondays
for it.
I'm drinking Diet Pepsi by the time we do this show, because otherwise I'm gonna have to prop my eyelids up with toothpicks most of my Mondays.
Yeah.
But no, I can remember sometimes when I was back when I was a general manager at a car dealership, we'd be working on music, and I'd be at work during the day talking to a customer, or I'd be talking to a couple sales guys, helping them with something, and boom, it just pop into my head, this lyric, or I'd hear somebody say something and it would kind of trigger that creative, and I'd be like, I'd like tune them out for like 2 minutes while I'm working in my head what that would look like. And then I'd look back and be like, wait a minute, back this up 2 minutes. What did you say? Because it, like you say, it just comes at the most unexpected times for somebody who's a creative, so to speak, and does something like that. But
Yeah. We got another in chat. Uncle Bones, he says, "I get ideas when I soap up also." I hope he's talking about writing.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell when somebody's joking or not just by the word. Jeff, maybe there's part of our brains that is, plays tricks on us because it knows when we're doing something else, it's not easy to just grab a pencil and paper or whatever. It's like, hey, let's get that thought in his head right now, Maybe so. Well, I don't know.
I also think that when you're trying to creatively, come up with something or create something, it's whether that's something visual, something, whether it's poetry, music, whatever. I don't think we're accessing what is straight line in front of you is easy to do. And that's typically what you focus on when you're trying to do it. You're like, you put all your thought in this one lane trying to come up with something. But yet, if you look at, this is an interesting analogy, but if you look at when I wake up from having a dream, I'll be dreaming about something. I'll think, wow, why did I dream about that? Right. This dream is, if I think back 2, 3, 4 days, there's something that happened that kind of planted that, but it wasn't big and obvious. It's like, I'll dream about a car that a coworker had parked next to mine one day at work, and it's like, there's that car in my dream. It's not the obvious. It's something that was in the peripheral that made its way into that creativity or that subliminal creativity. So,
yeah,
I wonder if that's kind of when we try to focus on, I need to come up with this, or I need to draw this, rather than focusing on the obvious. I think sometimes taking that 10-step back approach and think about it a little more openly, all of a sudden it gets easier, so to speak. But so tell me a little bit about, like I said,
it's just something to get, I think it's.
Go ahead. I think there's a little lag there.
Yeah, I'll let you catch up. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when we drove down to Texas, which wasn't a quick drive, it was like 17-hour drive, but when we drove down to Texas, we brought an enclosed trailer because we had our drum kit and all this stuff. But we drove through Oklahoma, and I'd never been to Oklahoma before. I'd been to Arizona, Texas, places I'd flown to. I'd never been in Oklahoma. And it was really interesting, the kind of the terrain and the diversity of the terrain. I mean, there's areas where it's rolling hills and very heavily hardwooded.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other areas that have more of a swampy feel to it. I mean, I was really intrigued by, you don't, when you think of the state, for those of you that live there, it must not just be like that one postcard picture. This is what Oklahoma looks like. There's so many different landscapes there to consider.
Oklahoma is actually one of the most diverse states in the lower 48. I mean, if you're in the eastern part, you've got your thick hardwood forests up in the northeast, fades down into the Pine Mountains of the Ouachita Mountains, which is very Appalachian-like. And you go a little further south, you got cypress swamps. Go to the central part, you've got, it fades into more desert. You get into the southwest part of the state down, by Mount Scott, you'd think you was in, New Mexico or something. And we've even got like sand dunes up in the northwest. So in the Panhandle, it's Colorado.
I think typically people kind of stereotype it as just having the flatness of Texas, right? They don't realize the undulation, the rolling hills and the river valleys and the things that exist there. It's not a plains look to a lot of that state. Whereas Texas, West Texas and East Texas, especially when you get down into South Texas, into the Gulf, things look incredibly different. But one thing they all have in common is they're all pretty freaking flat. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of undulation there. But so when you get out and have done research and had an opportunity to really spend time in the outdoors, do you spend most of that time in Oklahoma then, or do you typically travel around a lot?
I don't go that far out. I've made excursions into Arkansas in the past, but most of the places I go are in Oklahoma, southeast Oklahoma mostly. That's a pretty good hot spot. Will over there, I see Will Star Mysteries. He's my friend who has a really good channel on this also. He's came down and went with me. Another gentleman, Cornell, who has the No Such Thing podcast up in Massachusetts, he's come down. And where I took them is in a particular valley that's pretty hidden away in the Comanches, where I've had consistent activity. I'll just put it that way. And that all started in that place with the report I got back in 2002 of a man who was riding horseback down in those trails, and one of these creatures walked out in front of him. He said about 50 yards in front of him, and took a few steps out, saw him, and then ran back into the woods. And he was obviously a little bit disturbed by that. And a neighbor of mine actually told me about that, and I got in touch with him and went down in there and started doing some camping way back. And in first part of 2003, it would have been March, me and a friend of mine went down there, and it was pretty rainy, so we wasn't able to get way far back into this valley. But that night, something bounced a rock off a tree at the edge of our camp, and this rock was 25, 30 pounds. It was a big rock. A person would have thrown it, and it was thrown with force against that tree, and that left a big dent in the tree and stuff. And of course that was about 2:00 in the morning when that happened. And we weren't sleeping in a tent. We had which is my preferred way to sleep out, is we had a tarp up to keep, it was drizzling rain, to keep that off of us. And so we were open on all sides under that. And we didn't go back to sleep that night, to put it that way. And people have said, well, that was aggression. I said, no, aggression would have been throwing it right on top of us.
Yeah.
So I said, I the image that, or the impression that I got, and so did my friend Brian, was that this thing was letting us know it was there and would rather us not be. And also a time when me and Brian was there, we hiked further back in there, and something was throwing smaller pebbles over the edge of this, where the trail was, the bank went on up and blended into the mountain. Will, he knows exactly where I'm talking about. I pointed that out to him. But here's something to consider. When it was bouncing a rock off a tree, it was a big rock. When it was throwing rocks at us, kind of in our vicinity, they were small. So, read into that what you will. Now, somebody could say, well, the smaller rocks, that could have been a person. Well, if they were that dedicated to hiking that far back in there, yeah, sure. But the one big one that was bounced off that tree, a person could not have done that. It was just too big to have been thrown like that and from the distance. So I've been going back in there ever since.
I think that's something that you hear a lot in the community when people talk about, well, it's through this and it was close, or it was near us, or whatever, as if it was trying to do something. I don't think there's any trying. I think, and this is just my opinion, of course, I don't want to present this as some factual statement, but I believe that it possesses a high degree of precision, and that if something's thrown at you and it lands 5 feet away, it was meant to land 5 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
If a big rock's thrown at your tent and it falls short, it was probably meant to fall short. Things like that. And I only say that trying to invoke some common sense into trying to figure out what's the most plausible explanation for something. If you can imagine Michael Jordan or Shaquille O'Neal, how good they are at basketball, how many hours a day they spent shooting baskets, which is probably a lot, but I wouldn't say that it was more than a third of their life on a court. I mean, they spend a lot of hours doing it. If you're Sasquatch and you're raising young, or you're out in the woods 24 hours a day, decade after decade, you're on the court all the time. I mean, you can throw stuff anytime you want to and get really good at it. And I just think that ability, that the things that it teaches its young and how good it actually can get at something, I think as humans who spend X amount of time in the woods a year, it's pretty hard for us
Mhm.
to wrap our brains around how good it may actually be at something.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a far um, cry to think that they would use, throwing rocks to hunt with as well.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, and to go back to the rock throwing there also is Will over in Willstar when he was down. We had a rock thrown into our camp, not big, but I actually had the camera going. You can hear it hit the ground and bounce, and I was just giddy that I actually caught that, and it's all on my channel. It's the part 2, the night footage on that. So, of course,
yeah.
people that don't know me, they can say, "Yeah, you put that. Somebody could have done that." Well, yeah, but um, I was there. Will was there. We know what happened. So,
Yeah, it's interesting because I had a guest on the show one time that, and some people may remember this interview, but they were talking about how they had rocks thrown at them from this high ridge line above their campsite. And the next day they went hiking up there looking for tracks or any sign. And one of the things that he did was he took a Sharpie marker and started walking along and picking up rocks and I can't remember if he was putting little X's on them or just putting dots on all these rocks. And the next morning they had a few rocks being thrown off that ridge at him and they started looking at the rocks that were thrown down and they found one or two of them that he had wrote an X on. And
wow.
I thought, that's really a pretty neat
That,
idea, right? I mean, if you have to
that
have that
really was. That
situation
was
where
neat.
you know where the rocks are originating from that are being thrown at you. But it was just really kind of
That
a
I mean,
neat deal. If you could,
that's a good frame of.
yeah, if you were to document that process from the beginning of writing drawing little X's on I mean, it wouldn't take that much time. I mean, you could probably pick up 150 rocks and put an X on them in 10 minutes pretty quick. If out of the 10 or
Yeah,
12 rocks that are thrown overnight down at your tent, if you did it on enough rocks, you might find one with an X on it. But
right. Well, this whatever threw the rock into at the edge of our camp when me and Will were there, it couldn't have been a great distance away just because of the thickness of the trees. It would have been hard not to bounce it off, hit something else. So I've got a pretty good idea. It was basically up from the camp. There's a boulder field, and up about probably, gosh, Will's in the chat too. Not more than probably 40 feet. There's a real big boulder there that something could get behind. And I've had things approach and get behind that rock before. When I was by myself, that at night I didn't have the nerve to just walk up there by myself and see what it was. But I've got a pretty good idea that whatever tossed that rock was behind that boulder, or
mhm,
it seems to be the most viable explanation
yeah.
for that. But yeah, as far as Bigfoot out to get us, no, I'm not really that concerned about that. And I've wore this saying out, but it's what I think. If Bigfoot's out to get us, he's not very good at it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was before I knew anything about Bigfoot, but my encounter when I was 18 years old, people will say, "Well, you're lucky you weren't, hurt worse, or you're lucky it didn't kill you, or what." And I'm like, "Well, if it wanted to kill me, it could have killed me before I would have even known it was there." I mean, I think that, and I say this an awful lot, but I think that there's two reasons why it's probably going to interact with a human. One, it wants you to leave, which is probably by far the most common. Or
Mhm.
two, you've piqued its curiosity to some degree where it's trying to figure something out. It's trying to learn something from you. I think a lot of times when it throws something and it lands 5 feet away from you, or it throws something and it doesn't hit your tent, it lands close to your tent. I think that's done to curiously see how you'll react, so to speak, rather than cause you harm or if it wanted you to leave, throw a rock right into the tent and watch you how fast you can load that up in your pickup truck, right? I mean,
Yeah. Well, way back when I said my friend Brian was down there, and that one time, and it was something was tossing those smaller like pebbles over the edge of that bank at us. I remember Brian, we were curious about it. He picked one up and threw it back, and I still remember telling him, he said, "Man, if that's Sasquatch, that may not be a very good idea," But um, as far as outright aggression or anything like that, I've not experienced that myself. I hope I never do. But I'm of the mind the most dangerous thing in the woods are people. And
yeah,
as far as why they do that, maybe they know that we as humans are bad news, but they're too curious not to come close for a look. I mean, I don't know.
When I had many, many, many nights and hours of talks with Doug Hychek developing the research I was doing a year and a half ago and the approach that I was going to take to it, we really felt like the curiosity was the weakest link that you could expose. If you're really trying to get it intrigued, you got to evoke that curiosity. But the only way it's going to feel comfortable expressing its curiosity is if it didn't perceive you as a threat. So stop knocking on trees. Don't go in screaming and howling. Don't, even if you heard something, don't stand there staring at the tree line trying to figure out where it's at. Just keep going. Just keep being in the area.
That is hard not to do.
Oh, trust me, for 37 weeks, I
it's hard
realized how hard it is not to do. When you're walking in the darkness back to the clearing and you hear a wood knock in front of you, and I stopped, froze in my tracks looking at the ground, and I wanted to look up so bad, and I just thought, just keep walking. And I thought, this is the stupidest idea I've ever had in my life, was not to look, right? But
when Will was down there, I had my night vision camera and stuff, and we tried, because we were hearing movement on one side of our camp, just literally very, very soon after we heard a very loud vocalization behind us. It was during a burn ban, so we didn't have a campfire. It was a bright, it was a moonlit night, so you could still see pretty good. But we tried to walk, and it was like I said, a boulder field. We were trying to navigate that without lights going toward where it was, and decide, this is not safe. We're going to fall and break our necks or something. But we did the best we could with it. But we did turn flashlights on eventually.
Yeah. Just going to pull this up. This is a good point. I mean, Joe says, I think the way to get any animal to expose itself is to pique its curiosity, Bigfoot included. I would agree. As an archer, as an archery hunter, you put out a deer decoy and 400 yards across a cut bean field, the deer sees this and starts walking your direction. It's curious. It doesn't know at that point if this is a doe in heat. It doesn't know if it's, it doesn't know anything other than it sees a deer. I'm curious. I'm going to walk over there. And it's kind of the same thing with any type of hunting. You put decoys in a cornfield and start calling them, they could pick any cornfield to land in and eat. What they're really curious about is, why are all those geese in that one, right? So they all set their wings and fly in. It's really, when you look at it from a hunting aspect, it's the curiosity levels that we try to pique to draw game in closer. I remember one time going duck hunting here. The problem is about halfway through duck season, your little sloughs and ponds start freezing over. And we showed up at the pond we were going to hunt, and it was froze over. There was literally like an inch and a half, 2 inches of ice on it. And I got in the truck and ran up to the convenience store, and I bought a gallon of bleach they had there. And I came back and we poured it on the ice and broomed it around, and it looked blue. It looked like open water in the middle of this frozen little pond. And we kind of just laid our decoys on the ice and started calling. And these ducks would see this and set their wings and come in. And when they'd land, they thought they were landing on water. They'd like skid across the ice and freak out. But all we were doing was leveraging their curiosity. They see all the other little ponds froze over. They're curious, why isn't this one? So they fly in. So that's a great point, Joe. I think that even when I'm curious about something, the amount that I express my curiosity or allow myself to explore it is always going to be based on the threat level that's perceived in doing it. I might be curious as what's over the edge there, but if it's a 300-foot drop to the bottom, I might not hang my head out very far, right? I mean, got to create a situation in which it doesn't perceive you as a threat. And if you're going to go out there banging on trees and making, and I'm not saying there aren't situations where that's maybe called for, but if your goal, especially if you're alone or with just a small group, 2-3 people, and you're going out not making a lot of noise and you're walking through what you consider to be kind of a high value target area, there's been reports there before, whatever. I think the quieter you can be and the normal looking you can be, the longer it may leave its head sticking out from behind a tree to watch you, versus when you're walking out there yelling and banging on stuff. It might choose just to elusively back into the woods and not even let you know it was there to begin with. So
yeah, most of your sightings, and I'll say at least sightings I get that I think seem to be most credible, and even over the years, it seems to be by people who are just camping, hunting, driving down a remote road, and just happen to catch a glimpse of them.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're out there beating on a tree, I don't know. I've had something answer before, but that may not be. And I'm curious about this honest question. I know some people from a scientific aspect have hung up like chips with pheromones of like a chimpanzee or something like that. And like I say, I'm not a biologist or whatever, but from what little I know, a pheromone from a certain creature is designed to attract a creature of the same. So do we have any evidence that a Sasquatch would be attracted to a chimpanzee? I'm not ridiculing that approach. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Bring a live chimp and just take it for a walk, right?
Right. Oh, well, let's take it this way. Would a chimpanzee be attracted to an orangutan pheromone?
Yeah, I don't know. It is interesting, the curiosity that is displayed amongst primates, like Joe mentions. I played a clip this morning on Coffee Time of an orangutan that is at a zoo. It's on one side of the glass. There's a bunch of people on the other side. And it's right up against the glass, just sitting there looking through the glass. It's curious, watching people. And this woman is there with a 6-week-old baby. I mean, it's a pretty small kid. And that orangutan sees her holding it and looks at her and does this. It goes like this, points at himself. And she brings it over and puts it right up against the glass. And he doesn't just look at it. He touches his face to the glass right by its head and just looks at it and raises its eyebrows and leans back. And it's like, it was just that display of curiosity was amazing. It didn't feel like it couldn't express that curiosity. It didn't feel threatened that it couldn't do it. It was just a situation where people are interacting nicely with me. I'm able to do it. Like you say, it makes you wonder what could you do out there to intrigue that level of curiosity? I think the problem is most sightings and most interactions are come about because of its natural survival instinct of I want you to leave. When it sees a human, I want you to leave, right? Might start banging on something or break a branch. Might bring that up to making even more noise. It might come to a vocalization. It may get to the point where if you're oblivious to all that and not leaving, it may decide to show itself. It might throw a rock at you or pine cones or whatever. It just wants you to leave, and it's trying different things to get you to leave. But when you start dealing with interactions that are leveraging its curiosity, I think you come up with the opportunity to possibly get a lot different results.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind, David, that me, you, and Will Star and Joe, if we went out at 3 a.m. and banged on a tree and had an audio recorder running and got one to bang back, we'd be sitting at the bar for quite a while telling stories about it, laughing. It's a great experience. It's done nothing at all to move the ball forward in getting answers. Nothing.
No, it's
just an experience. We need to start
right.
figuring out how we leverage its curiosity and capture data through that process that may move the ball forward. Whether that's samples for DNA evidence, whether that's getting it to step in a certain area that, for instance, one time I knew that we had a mountain lion that was coming in on our cattle ranch out in Fort Pierce, South Dakota, which is kind of weird. It's in the middle of the state, but there's a lot of livestock there. And we took a bag of silica sand and spread it all along an area that we knew it was in a line that this thing was moving from A to B every night, it seemed like. And the next day, perfect prints laid out through that silica sand. Prints you probably wouldn't have seen over the top of the dirt. Now, can you imagine putting silica sand out in an area and then you put a chip somewhere? Maybe it doesn't interact with the chip. Maybe it doesn't go grab the chip. Maybe you leave food somewhere that you're trying to get it to take. Maybe it doesn't do that, but maybe it did walk close enough that it stepped in that silica sand, realized, and it turned around and walked away. Now you've got a perfectly laid out print with lots of definition that wouldn't be there had it just stepped in the weeds,
Jay Fritz has a comment there that looks thinks directed at you. You're almost talking like we have to kill one or engage one. This I can't go with. No way, no how.
I don't know when I said that. Sure he's talking
but yeah, I'm not. I don't know. Your Jeff says you're almost talking like we have to kill one or engage one.
I went out of my way over and over to say we don't have to kill one. As far as here it is. You're almost talking like we have to kill one or engage one. This I can't go
with. Encage is what he meant to say.
I don't. Encage one. Yeah, I don't know where you get that, Jay. I did not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to think outside the box because thumps on an audio recorder and blurry pictures do not move the ball here. We aren't getting answers. We aren't winning over any scientists to get in line with us based on a tree knock. We need to start capturing data, and we need to create situations in which that data can be captured. Possibly what I believe is through leveraging curiosity. That's the point that I was making. So, but yeah.
I want to be clear myself. I'm definitely not for killing one. I'm not in that camp whatsoever.
No.
tell you, if you were out in the woods with me and you were raising a rifle to shoot one, you would not like me because I would ruin your shot.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that's and of course, let me be clear, we don't really know what they are, but
exactly.
my impression is I think they're a lot closer to us than what many people may be comfortable with. I don't think that they're, and again, this is just my opinion. I don't think they're simply an undiscovered ape. Yeah, that's just my thought. I think they are a lot smarter than that. They've avoided us for a very long time, or we wouldn't be having
Yeah,
these conversations.
yeah, yeah. As
And
far as what slot they fit into, I don't know
yeah,
what slot that is, but when I look at as somebody who hunts and I do so to feed my family. I don't do it for trophies to hang on the wall. But when I go out and shoot a deer, when I go out and shoot an elk, usually it's archery hunting. Um, the idea of going out and trying to shoot a chimpanzee or a primate or something, I couldn't do that. I don't care how hungry I was. They look too much like me. I got a problem with that, right? They seem to be I don't know what exact words to define that notion is, but too close to on the scale for me to feel comfortable harvesting one,
yeah,
whether it's
and
it
and,
or whatever.
and I'm kind of like where Joe says he's not for killing one himself, but science is pretty sure not to accept anything but a body or skeleton at this point, anyway. And if science needs a dead one for somebody to kill it before they can accept it, as far as I'm concerned, they can just keep on not accepting it.
I believe that if this is just hypothetical, but I believe that whether it's through my plan of vector collection of DNA or in analyzing it in university labs, or whether it's Darby's effort at North Carolina State, whichever route you're going, if we can map out without a body that there is a unidentified species X, and that genomic sequence from geographical area 1 matches the genomic sequence of geographical area 2, and so on, that this is definitively out there. We know exactly what it looks like when it comes to the sequence. Because if we can get 1, 2, 3, 17, 25, all samples to match, right? We don't need a body to prove that there's something there. Science will recognize that something's there. What you would need is a body for species X to be Bigfoot, right? Because you got to have something collected from the source to match all of the data that you've collected and given a fictitious identification to. But
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing. I think if you could get the DNA evidence that there's genomic sequences being collected that are identical from different areas, that seem to indicate that whether it's part human DNA, part unknown primate, whatever, but it's the same. I think you could get science on board enough now to start thinking outside the box and getting involved to where we could prove this thing exists without needing a dead body, so to speak.
I want
But
to, like I said, Jeff, you and I have not talked before, at least not very much. To what end do you want their existence to be proven for? To what end?
I think that the whole reason why I started doing research is I went a long time without, when I was in the military, when I was in college, when I started a career in real estate where I had investors, where my reputation meant whether or not I got paid. I did not feel comfortable talking
Mm-hmm.
about my encounter that happened when I was 18 years old. I had a security clearance in the military that I would probably lose in 5 minutes had I said I saw Bigfoot. And I just,
Really?
there was just too much on the line that I felt like the risk is too high compared to any reward. I'll figure out a way to bury this in my head. When I got
Mhm.
a little bit older and started realizing, look, I'm not rich, but I'm content with what I've done in my business. I don't care
Mhm.
anymore if I lose investors. I don't care if somebody doesn't. I can afford for you to not believe me. I don't care. And when I got to that
Mhm.
point, my first reason for wanting to start researching about 4 years ago and looking for answers out in the field and not just online or in books was because I don't want anybody to feel like this is too taboo to talk about to somebody
Okay.
for year after year if they've had an experience like that. This is that is you don't realize the weight that you carry doing that until that weight's gone. Until you've talked about it and you say, you know what? I didn't realize how much weight I had on my back trying
Mhm.
not to talk about it and live with all these unanswered questions. And yet, when you do finally find somebody to talk to it about, I wasn't aware there was a community of people like this online that you could go say, let me tell you what happened to me. And other people would say, wow, that sounds like what happened to me. I didn't know that existed. And I would love to see it get to a point to where at least if we can recognize that these genomic sequences exist and it's real. I don't care if we ever have one in a cage. I don't care if there's ever a body. But let's get it to a point where people can at least acknowledge that there is factually something out there. We've seen the DNA for it. And these people aren't crazy when they say they've seen one. You know,
Mhm.
I don't know. I honestly am one that's kind of in that camp of we could take this too far. Uh, to a point to where maybe it doesn't work in their favor when it comes to their ability to survive and be elusive.
Right.
Uh,
I agree.
you get it to a point to where parks are opened up, these things exist out here, more people should drive through it and look now. I don't think that works for them. Um, then if we're going to find the slot that it fits in has any type of human reference in DNA, now all of a sudden, what rights would they have? I mean, it's gonna get
Very
really,
true.
really weird if
Well,
it depending on the slot it falls in, if when we get to the point where everybody acknowledges this is real.
now, if going back to the human part, if some of the old stories about them actually abduct, like the Seraphina Long story up from British Columbia, where she was abducted allegedly by a male Sasquatch and actually was impregnated by it. And
Yeah.
I do say if that is true, then they would have to be very closely related with us for that to happen. And then we would definitely have to look at what rights or whatever these beings would have. And I seen a comment over here, and I'd like to know which what he's actually speaking about in particular. Greg Olson said, we already know over and over again they are at least part human. Blood and DNA hasn't done anything. I'm
Yeah, I don't.
curious what he's pointing at right there.
Well, I mean, you've got there are some claimed studies that you would have to subscribe to in order to
You're
draw
talking
the
about Cat and
conclusion.
Melba?
Yeah, in order to draw the conclusion that it's already been proven they're part human. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to. What I will say is this: in order for me to find an exact slot that I feel comfortable putting them in, we aren't even close to that yet. I don't care what anybody claims to have done. I don't care what results have came in so far. It is not conclusive enough for me to feel comfortable putting them in a slot.
Mhm.
And most of the people that I know that are pretty skilled in the ability that you'd think they could do something like that, like Darby Orcutt, a DNA specialist professor at
So
North
I'm
Carolina
very
State.
curious
He
for
won't put
that.
that into a slot. He actually brought up some really interesting things last night on Cole's show, and so did another really interesting perspective was Harder's, what he was saying on Nikki's show last night. He's saying, if we're going to start looking at crossbreeding, right, and hybridization, most of those animals aren't very good at reproducing. It's a very low probability. And I'll give you a good example of that. Siberian Huskies are often bred with part wolf or a wolf, and they'll come up with a crossbreed of, wolf dogs that are half Siberian Husky, half wolf. The problem is that the AKC had a really big problem of recognizing that as an actual breed, because wolf dogs, the hybrids, don't seem to do very well at having puppies. They just don't. Most of those breeders have to keep breeding a wolf to a Siberian Husky to create those puppies and sell them. And then what happened was a lot of people bought them thinking, oh, cute Siberian Husky puppy. And when the thing gets to be about a year old, that hybrid
the wolf comes out,
personality starts to kick in, and they start ditching them out in the woods because they can't have this thing around their house anymore. But what was really interesting is the crossbreeds themselves weren't real successful at breeding. Okay. And so any idea that these are bred with females or bred with, humans and created these, the idea that that's going to keep moving on, we seem to see some species where that's an issue. That doesn't work well. But then again, we also see back to where when, and this Joe would be somebody better to talk about this. I read an article about this on Coffee Time and talked to Brian King Sharp about it on Coffee Time a couple weeks ago, to where if we look back 10,000 years ago and humans and the other bipedal that was, other bipedals that existed throughout history, at one point they geographically separated from each other, but there were points where they weren't geographically separated. And there's a lot of scientific theory that there was interbreeding going on, right? And so I don't know that there's conclusive evidence to support it or to shoot it down. But
well, and it relies on how factual those stories are.
Yeah. I mean, let me ask you this. When I look at the idea of Sasquatch, I have to ask myself, is this a species that is declining? Maybe it was in bigger numbers at one point, is declining and is being abandoned into different niches as those populations get smaller. It's almost like a storm fizzling out on radar, right? There's little speckles where it still exists at the end before it's all gone. And is this something where this is a population decline and what we see right now is just the remnants that are left there of it, abandoned throughout North America and some other areas of the world? Or is this something that is on the incline, which I would have a hard time digesting? I think that it's more likely that it's on the decline, and what we're seeing is these abandoned segments and micro communities of them that are just left here and there,
and becoming more in contact with people because of our encroaching into their habitat more.
Yeah, there's areas of that. I mean, here's the thing. Here's the reason why I have a hard time with them being able to move 1,000 miles, is because if their number one goal is to be elusive, although when we look at states like Florida and Tennessee and, these states where you get an awful lot of sightings in Florida, right? There's an awful lot of people there. And the amount of high percentage target area when you have the Everglades, the green swamp, areas like that, there's still a lot of space there that's very dense. It could support a population. There's so many people down there that if that population existed, it would be likely that you'd have a high number of encounters and check marks on the map, so to speak. But where there isn't much interaction is when you start getting up into Saskatchewan and Manitoba and British Columbia and these remote areas where you can crawl on your hands and knees with a broken leg for 30 miles and you can't find a frickin' road, let alone another human, right? If they needed to be elusive to survive, why wouldn't they move to the more remote areas instead of trying to exist on the fringes of society? So I don't believe that it's possible that, they migrate 1,000 miles every spring and walk back 400. I don't think they do that. I think there's corridors where maybe they move from A to B to C based on resources, and what's in season, fish running up creeks, berry fields, drying up. They might move a couple hundred miles, but I don't believe that the one in Florida travels to Maine and back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think they probably are hunter-gatherers within a range, maybe. But yeah, I mean, again, you're saying like there's a lot of reports in Florida. Yeah, they're reports, but what percentage of those reports are an actual sighting of an actual Bigfoot?
Yeah, if you look at
that's what we run into.
If you look at the actual terrain there, it's very dense. It's very dense. I mean, when you're in the green swamp and stuff, the idea of, I saw it 300 yards away. You can't see anything 300 yards away there.
Right. What I'm getting at is say, okay, take 100 reported sightings. How many of those are going to be mistaken identity? That happens, especially with vocalizations, such like that. Out of that, how many are hoaxed reports? I mean, there's going to be some of them that are. So out of say just that number, how many of those are actually going to be an actual Bigfoot? That's the big unknown right there.
It's a big unknown, and
at least to me.
There is a psychology to opening up and actually reporting an experience that is different in how that exists in different areas. Meaning, I've said this before, you walk into a bait shop in northern Minnesota, or you walk into a small town bar up in British Columbia or Washington State, and 10 guys in there having a beer, and you say, how many here has ever seen a Bigfoot? Half the damn place might raise their hand, You walk into a cafe in Florida and ask that, and 3/4 of them are grabbing their phone ready to dial 911. I mean, so how many of them feel comfortable reporting it or talking about it? I think there are more people in Florida who have actually filed a report based on what they have seen or not seen than there are in Washington State, let's say. I think there's a lot of people who have seen something that have never filled out a report. They've never felt compelled to. They've got friends they talk to that have had experiences. I don't need to fill out a report. You know what I mean?
And look how many people are moving into Florida too, as far as the wilderness there is being very much encroached upon. The Everglades are disappearing. So if there is a population down there, which I'm sure there is, it stands to reason that they're going to cross paths with people more.
Yeah.
And I've not been down there personally, by the way.
Chess versus Jeff, at what point do they stop moving further in? Take the indigenous in Brazil as an example. That's a good question. I mean, there's a give and take to every situation when it comes to surviving in the outdoors. And I had tried to draw a hypothesis that I was starting to notice in data that I was gathering, looking at people who physically describe what they've what they've seen, and it's being drawn by like Larry Badson, right? Larry's drawn hundreds of faces that people have described to him and sharing their encounters on over on Bigfoot Odyssey. But one of the things that I found interesting is maybe not so much in that Mason-Dixon line, maybe not so much where you're at in Oklahoma even, but in Texas, Louisiana, Florida, where it gets hot, you start hearing about when they describe the hair and the shorter hair lengths on average, easily on average, by far shorter hair lengths that are usually described. Shorter height, alpha males, 7.5, 8 foot tall. Weights, weighed 500-600 pounds. Then you start hearing the ones that are described in British Columbia and northern Minnesota and Michigan and Saskatchewan and places like this. And you're talking about alpha males up to 10 foot in height. You're talking about longer hair that was hanging way down. And you start hearing these differences in these descriptions. And I started thinking, if we look at other species like white-tailed deer, a fully grown 7-year-old mature buck in Alabama versus a fully grown mature buck in Kansas or South Dakota, you're talking 40% larger in the plains. They're corn-fed. They're not acorn-fed. They have to survive winters. The caloric intake they need and the anabolic burn that they put off to survive 20 below zero and 40-mile-an-hour winds in these northern extremes, they have to be bigger to make it through it, right? And I'm thinking, why wouldn't that be plausible to assume the same with Bigfoot? Wouldn't those ones that live in these snow belts probably carry more weight? Wouldn't they maybe even be taller? Who knows? I'm not trying to say this is a fact. This is just a hypothesis that I've drawn.
Well, we're just kicking ideas around.
That shorter hair length that you see in the South, when you're in hot temperatures 10 months out of the year for the most part, your body needs to ventilate its heat. So you would have less follicles per square inch, and they'd likely be shorter. They'd probably stand up straighter off the skin before they had curvature to them. Whereas a hair follicle designed to insulate your body and maintain body heat up in the north would be finer. It would be longer. There'd be more follicles per square inch. I mean, we see these tendencies in black bear and other animals that exist in both of those climates, right? Why wouldn't it be the same with Bigfoot? It would make more sense that it had longer hair draping off the arm in the north than maybe it did in the south. It needs to insulate its body. It's not trying to ventilate its body heat. 6 months a year, it's fighting us to not freeze to death. So when I start looking at stuff and drawing hypotheses like that, you're talking about differences in how they look, but maybe not in any DNA or genomic imprint. I mean, you take a white-tailed deer in Alabama and a white-tailed deer in North Dakota and compare their DNA, you got the same animal, but you got 40% different body size, So there's a lot of variables that I'm just, the only point of bringing up is a lot of variables that could exist that don't necessarily mean different slots for these things to fit in. They may all be the same. They just have different appearances and different,
Yes, that kind of goes along with Greg Najjar's question over there. He said, he wrote in capitals to get our attention. He said, can you guys agree on how many subspecies roughly, please? And I think that's kind of what you were alluding to, that
Well,
they're
yeah,
not
I don't know.
necessarily,
How would
not
you define a
necessarily,
subspecies, David? I mean,
I don't even know. Because uh, I'll go, okay, one of my hobbies is reptiles.
mhm,
And the most common venomous pit viper in Oklahoma is the copperhead, at least where I live.
yeah.
There are less recognized subspecies of copperhead now than what there used to be, because now they've decided, well, what we were saying were subspecies, now are not. So I don't think I'm qualified to say that. Now, like what you were talking about, yeah, a lot of the sightings down in the south of Sasquatch seem to be a different body make and such as what is more common in, say, the Pacific Northwest. Yet at the same time, down in the Kiamishi Mountains, I've heard some reports of ones around 7, 8 feet tall, and something I seen on video. And you've probably heard them talk about the casino footage that
Mhm.
was taken down here in Oklahoma. Okay, I was the first investigator on scene there. I saw the footage on that security camera firsthand, and that creature was over 9 feet tall. And we were able to determine that. Me and the other fellow was Roger Roberts. He's a private investigator by trade. We were doing that investigation for the BFRO at that time, and there was a small light pole beside that grease trap where this creature was approaching. And in its slightly leaning forward position as it walked up under that light, we were able to measure up that light pole, that it, in that slightly leaning forward posture it was taking, was over 9 feet tall.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's a very different description than what, being of shorter mass and such. We could not tell the
Yeah,
color because it's kind of a black and white look, but it's hair. It was hair covered. We could tell that, but it
I
was
would
over 9 feet
imagine
tall.
I would imagine there's probably a good representation that if I was correct, and I don't know that I am or not, but if I was correct that in extreme southern heat climates, there are certain dominant traits, shorter hair, less follicles per square inch, things like that, versus up north, maybe it's longer hair, more follicles per square inch, things like that, to achieve ventilating or insulating body heat, depending on the climate that they're in. There is a certain area, it's not like this Mason Dixon line where one can't cross the other, right? I would say 2/3 of the upper 48 or the lower 48 would probably be kind of a little bit of both. I mean, there's probably interbreeding and not a clear representation of one over the other, so to speak. So I don't
Yeah.
know when we talk subspecies, I guess when I compare that to what we refer to as human, when I take my DNA and I send it to ancestry.com and they say you're from Scandinavian descent, relatives from Wales and different areas in Norway, and I, I can learn a lot about the origin
And we
of my
got different races
ancestry.
of people that look
Yeah,
different. So
which is what leads me to bringing this up, David. If I was to look at Shaquille O'Neal, and I was to look at a 4 foot 4 inch adult male Aborigine, and look at those two people stand next to each other, if I didn't know better, I'd tell you they aren't the same species. If I didn't know any better,
mhm.
I might think that I'm looking at
Now,
one type of primate and another type of a primate. I wouldn't necessarily assume, oh, well, those are the same. They're both human. They look different, like extremely different. And so when we say subspecies, check their DNA, they're both human. They just have
right.
different origins different dominant and recessive traits that have taken over those areas that they came from that had a
Different
high
skin color,
emphasis
different
on
build,
how they
and all that.
appear. So, you know,
one thing I will say about the creature on the casino footage is it wasn't as bulky as like what, say, the Patterson film. If that indeed was real, how bulky Patty was. This creature was taller and lankier, much lankier than like the creature on the Patterson film. And that may be just because maybe it was a male, maybe it wasn't eating good. I mean, there's so many factors, that play in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say anything that's perceived as ignorant or racially, that's not what I'm trying to point out here. I'm just saying that if you take somebody who's of 5'5" Asian descent, and you take some guy that's 7.5 foot from, from Africa, and you take one of us white guys who literally weighs 400 pounds and has a mullet down the middle of their back, and you stand those three human beings next to each other and say, are they the same? If you didn't know better, you'd say, no, they're not the same. They look completely different. So that's where, without really having a reference of DNA and an understanding of origin, the question of how many subspecies do you think there are, I don't really know how to define that, because I have to take into account what us humans would appear like if you didn't know our origin either. But I'm just reading the rest of some of these comments here. And if anybody has a comment they want to ask David, put it in all caps. We'll try to pull it up here. But
yeah, Alan Laster asked, when do you do most of your research? I kind of answered him on the phone as well. But
let me go back to
I like to, as soon as the rainy season gets really over and I can get down into the areas I like to go in the spring through fall. I tend to stop about the time deer season gets close because I don't want to get shot by a deer hunter by accident. Hopefully not. But yeah, summer and throughout the summer and early fall is my main time I like to do that. And Greg Najjar,
Eric was asking,
has anyone ever heard of?
Eric asked, does David know if tribal police were involved? Possible written report. It must have been when you were talking about.
Yeah, I don't know that. The only thing I knew the tribe was involved in after that was running people off that had heard about it and were coming on trespassing everywhere. So that had become a problem. I knew they kind of put a stop to that.
And Alan said,
and no, Greg, I don't know of any documented hospitalization due to a Sasquatch attack. I do not. Alan, what's your favorite equipment? Oh, I mean, I take a GoPro. I've got a couple of GoPros. They're just easy to get around, and the video and photographic quality on those are really good. I've got a fairly inexpensive camera that's got night vision that I like to take out, but nothing extravagant.
Yeah, that's an interesting question of, do you know of anybody who's been hospitalized from a Sasquatch attack? I had my hip scraped up and bruised in my stomach after my encounter in '87, but not only did I not go to the hospital, I wasn't within 100 miles of the hospital where we were. But I would wonder, if somebody did have the ability to go to a hospital, would they?
Yeah, I do have a parabolic
that they would
microphone.
go and say, I was attacked by a bear, or I was, are they going to go to the hospital and tell them what happened and the injuries coming from Sasquatch, or would they try to avoid um, having to explain something they don't understand themselves, probably, by simply saying it was something else that did it. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I've never looked into a gugway. That's kind of what's a gugway? That's like a southern swamp Bigfoot or something like that. It's one of the questions over there.
So
I think that's something they call it down in Louisiana or something. I think.
yeah.
No, did not. That was kaiju. I did not investigate that. That was a BFRO thing. Roger Roberts and another fella before I came into that investigated that. Now, I've been around that area for sure, but that wasn't one that I was involved in.
Just looking at. Yeah, the only reason why I question whether or not somebody would go to a hospital with injuries and say this happened, I was attacked by a Sasquatch, is this is something that's hard for us to imagine being in that position. Would you tell the hospital this is what happened? But I've talked often about the 9 reports I got from a search and rescue team up in the Boundary Waters, where they extracted people that they felt had had experiences with Sasquatch, and these extractions were kind of ponied out to them from the county sheriff's department that usually does extractions from the Boundary Waters if somebody breaks a leg or attacked by a mountain lion or somebody fell out of their canoe and drowned. But there are calls that are subbed out to a private search and rescue team. There's one on the U.S. side. I think there's 2 on the U.S. side, and there's one on the Canadian side of the border. But the interesting thing when they would get these people and get them out of these areas, when they'd ask them about what happened, these incidences were recounted very vaguely. These people were disturbed badly. I mean, to where they had the skill set to get, 30 miles in to a remote, very remote area in primitive camp with a canoe. And they didn't have what it took to get back out. They were literally coming apart, losing themselves, just destroyed by an experience that happened. And it'd usually be the next morning when the search and rescue team would arrive. When they'd first interview them, it was hard to get real good, accurate details on them. These people were distraught. They were in shock. And eventually, the more he talked to them, the more comfortable they got, the more they opened up and finally told him the thing was standing by our campsite. And, they'd tell him all the details of what happened. But that's not where it would start. They were reluctant, like, this guy's going to think I'm crazy. I'm embarrassed right now. I couldn't get myself out of here. And I wonder if there's some people that would end up in the emergency room if they were attacked by one. Would they be open to tell the doctor this is what happened? Maybe they wouldn't. I don't know.
Depends on the person.
But yeah, so when you go out now and spend time in the woods, I know you say most of your time is spent there in Oklahoma. Do you enjoy looking into different people's accounts and investigating those? Do you still do that? Do you go to those areas and try to interview those people, vet out what they experience?
Sometimes, not as much as I used to. It's solo. Most of my camping, I go by myself into areas that I find interesting, and mainly what I do is I go camping and I just try to pay attention, and maybe one will be curious and come up close and have some type of interaction. As far as going to people's places and looking into um, a sighting or an event. I do it at times. The last one was one that was ongoing, and that was at the Copeland residence down to close to Antlers, Oklahoma, where he was. His kids were, reporting these creatures coming up and watching them and stuff, and he had some very strange things going on around that. Matter of fact, Carrie Arnold came up and did a documentary on his place. Did a very good job at it. I'd recommend anybody watching that because it goes in depth. But I spent I made several trips to Mark's place there, looking into what was going on there. And they've moved off from there now. They moved back to Arkansas, but they had quite an experience there. But no, Alan, I don't really travel that much outside of Oklahoma. There's plenty for me to do here on that avenue. Plus, my job, it's kind of hard to get away for extended periods of time. I know my friend Will Star there. He's really wanting me to come up to Ohio and look at some places with him too. But I got to have two things to do that. I've got to have the time to do it, plus get over my fear of flying. I don't have very many phobias. Flying is, and I agree, Greg, rest in peace, Carrie. He was a nice gentleman.
Joe brings up an interesting point here. He says, depends on the person. Rasta is what he's named the one he had an encounter with. If Rasta had attacked me, I lived through it and was in the hospital and asked, I would say Bigfoot attacked me. Keep in mind, Joe, you'd say that knowing what you know right now about Bigfoot, and you'd be comfortable saying that. What if you didn't know nothing about Bigfoot? You never heard about this. It was something you saw once when you were a kid in a comic book. You don't know anything that you know now, and all of a sudden this thing does something to cause you to be in the hospital, and somebody says, what happened? This is a whole different situation, because you're still trying to figure out in your mind what it was, let alone what happened, right? And so
well, let me say this too. Nobody knows how they're going to react personally to a traumatic event until it happens to them.
Amen to that.
Different people react differently. It's just the way it is. Some people will have a traumatic event and seem to come through it without any PTSD, if you will, from it. Another person will react totally different. I don't think we have a choice necessarily there, but different people act differently.
I talk about when I was in the military and you train with your squad over and over, day after day, for months and months, on how you will react in different situations. And then when you are in combat and that happens and you are taking fire, you're trying to figure out this is your role, this is my role, this is what you need to do, this is what he needs to do. And in the middle of it, somebody's laying there on the ground frozen. And this is something that he's trained for every day, day after day after day. But when it came down to it, he had no idea that that's how he would react. And I'll tell you what, most of the time when something like that happens, when you see who it is that it's happening to, you never would have guessed that'd be the person. The one they did label and say this is the most likely guy to screw this up or freeze up or not react right is this guy. He's probably the Audie Murphy out there kicking ass. Yeah. It's the guy who you thought put on the show and walked the walk, and he's the one crumpled up in the corner. You don't know how you're going to react under a high duress PTSD type inducing situation until you're in it. People all the time will say, you should have done this. Why didn't you do that? But
Yeah, and generally with me, the person that's the loudest and the most braggadocious, that's not the one I want by my side in a in a in a hot situation, if you will. Um, let's see
Kaiju
any.
has a question here. What methods do you recommend for researching? What is your approach?
I go camping and pay attention. That's in a nutshell. That's what I do, and I do that simply because, in my opinion, most of the people who have the sightings are not the ones who are beating on a tree or yelling or something like that. It's the person that happens to be in the right place at the right time, is camping, going about their business, and um, happens to get lucky. Uh, and that's not saying I don't hit a stick on a tree once in a while. I just can't help it sometimes.
Yeah, right. You see that
Like,
perfect stick,
and,
and it's like that'd be awesome to bang that one against the
and,
tree.
uh, and I know, you hear a noise in the woods. They say, don't turn your flashlight on. That
Yeah,
is the absolute hardest thing not to do, because you want to see what's there, and in your mind, you're going to say, like, man, it's right there. I'm going to turn this light on. But Jeff, the thing is, if you're in thick vegetation, about the only thing that light lights up is the leaves
right.
nearest to you.
I was gonna say a lot of times if something's 30 yards away from you and you turn that light on and all you're lighting up is 5 to 10 yards away from you, it throws your depth perception off. You were better off not turning it on because once your depth perception's off, now you're going to turn it off and try to get used to what's beyond this 8 yards that I just lit up, right? Whereas with even if it's low light, just very minimal light,
Are we
it's a lot
back?
different when you're out there and it's absolutely cloud cover, and I mean it's pitch dark. Most nights aren't like that. Most nights there is some ambient light that exists. But do you think that a lot of the things that happens when you're out there is subtle? It's not like bolts of lightning going off, right? There's these indications that something could be there. I think a lot of times they're subtle. And if you don't have your peripheral opened up, you're going to miss it. I think one of the things that you could do best when you're out in any woods is just get it all slowed down in your head a little bit and try to widen the vision of what you're looking at as far as your peripheral goes. Because if we're just sitting there thinking, I'm listening to see if there's a wood knock, I'm listening to see if there's a wood knock, you might not have noticed the brushing of a branch behind you because you've already got it in your head. This is what I'm listening for, right? But I was just looking at some of the other comments, see what are out there. I think another good idea too. I'd like to know your thoughts on this, David. Is when Kaiju says, "What methods do you recommend for researching?" I've gotten to where I'm trying to challenge myself into maybe not trying to reinvent the wheel on what's being done, but figure out if you could move 15 degrees to the left or to the right on that approach and make it more effective. Because going out, in my mind, it just seems like if we're going to go out and keep reproducing these tactics that we've been using for the last 55 years, we don't get any closer to an answer because they aren't getting us closer. I don't think they're wrong. It's just maybe they need to be changed or tweaked or there's something we're missing. You know what I mean? What are your thoughts on that?
I just continually go back to the majority of sightings are by people who are camping, hiking, driving, going about their
Yeah.
business. And I try to replicate that. And I do. I go camping. I take my fishing rod. If there's a creek there, I hike the creek and fish. Me and my friend Brian, uh, back over a decade ago, were hiking down that same creek, and something was pacing us in the woods. and would whistle once in a while. Not like a person type whistle, but kind of a deep chest type whistle. And we didn't see what was doing it, but it was definitely curious. And we were not doing anything but walking that creek and fishing,
Yeah.
So kind of, I think it really, a lot of it is, pick a spot where there have been sightings over the years and just go camping. Take as few people as you can. I don't think I've ever gone out really with more than 3 people.
Yeah.
Except, when we were like doing the Bigfootville thing and investigation at the casino footage thing. Of course, there were lots of people there during that time, but generally by myself out camping, or one other person, possibly 3, and that camp and pay attention. And that's pretty simple.
Will Star asks, where can he hear my encounter? Yeah,
Jay says, find a stump and sit on it. That's probably a pretty good idea. Sit and listen.
Yeah. Will Star, my encounter is on quite a few different channels, but you can go to my channel that I still maintain. Before I joined the Untold Radio Network, it's called Pine Island Research. And if you go back through past episodes, you'll see one that's titled My 1987 Encounter. I believe you can hear it there. And then also, Sasquatch Wizard Adirondack says, Jeff, this is why having an audio recorder on your person at all times helps when listening back. The great thing about an audio recorder, you don't have to point it in the right direction for it to work. I mean, when you look at cameras, video cameras, whether or not strapping something on your chest or your back, you still need the right angle to capture something. It still needs to get focused on a certain depth. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Very little that can go wrong strapping an audio recorder to your backpack or to a tree that's 50 yards away from your campsite overnight. Maybe triangulate if you have 3 audio recorders and put them all, let's say 20 to 40 yards away from your campsite out into the woods on 3 different sides of it. The idea that something is curious enough to take a look at you would be right about where those audio recorders are, I would think.
Right. Well, Cornell, when he was down from Massachusetts, he set a recorder out in the woods, and he got some very interesting stuff, some loud wood knocks, got some vocalizations and stuff that we didn't catch because we were asleep.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all he did. He took a recorder and put it out in the woods several yards from camp,
Yeah, one of the best audio recordings that I've heard is a series of them that Blaine Hycheck, Doug Hycheck's son, and his girlfriend, after hiking 20-some miles back into Angleworm Lake in the Boundary Waters, they accessed a very, very, very remote area and set up audio recorders. And they were there for 3 days. One of the interesting things is they both were really into hiking. And so they'd set up audio recorders, just set one on the picnic table when they would leave their main campsite for 3 or 4 hours to go hiking, thinking this is an opportunity, a window of opportunity for this thing to say, hey, they've been in this one spot and now they're leaving, and I've watched them walk way back there. This is my chance to go walk through that campsite now, right? I mean, that it just seems plausible that would be a high value target to put an audio recorder in. I hear of people that do that with coolers, that put a video camera or a camera in a cooler and shut the lid. They spend all day in their campsite, but when they're getting ready to leave, they put that camera in that cooler and they walk away and they go out in the boat fishing for 3-4 hours and come back. Because if something's going to walk in your campsite, whether it's a human or a Sasquatch, there's a good chance that that cooler gets open if it's been seeing you If Sasquatch has been watching you camp for 2 days and every time you open that cooler, you're smiling and eating something, it might put 2 and 2 together and say, I wouldn't mind opening that cooler.
I tell you what, a raccoon can sure open a cooler. Don't think they can't.
Yeah. Yeah. But just going through some of the last comments here. So yeah, well, I appreciate, David. I appreciate you taking the time and coming on. It was a fun conversation. We'll have to get you back again.
Yeah, no problem. Had fun.
I've got a couple of shows where I'm going to go back. There's a couple of topics that are going to be coming up where I'm going to do.
You tell Kaiju, he said, do you know where I can hear those? Oh, never.
Again, those
Audio
would be
recordings.
go on my old channel, Pine Island Research.
You froze
go
up.
to the past. Oh, can you hear me now? Am I froze now? This is so weird because it's not freezing up on my end.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, if you go on Pine Island Research's YouTube channel and go through the past videos, there is one on there for the audio recordings, Blaine Highcheck's audio recordings. I think it says Angleworm Lake or something like that. Whiskey Jack. I can't remember which area it was, but they're on there. You'll see them. But yeah, I was thinking about doing a show or two in the future here where I've got a couple topics I wanted to talk about and maybe do it with a panel, whether I get, you and Thomas or, a couple of people together just to get people's opinions on a couple different things. I'm trying not to reproduce the same stuff we're seeing on all the other channels. I really think from the feedback that we've gotten here at Untold that people really take the most interest in hearing people sharing their experiences versus the big names that are coming in. I could go get some of these big names you're seeing at these conferences, but it's just going to be the same canned interview you see them give on 50 other channels. I don't really have as much of a want to do that. I'd rather get people who are researching, who are out in the field, who want to come in and share their experience and what they've learned or what their opinions are, things like that. So, and David's buffering here now. Give him a minute, see if he comes back before we sign off. Oh, he fell off. Well, anyways, I appreciate him coming on. It's a great conversation with him. I appreciate everybody in chat who's taken the time to put some questions out. And a lot of thought you put into them. Oh, here he is back. You hear us now?
Yeah, your internet went. Yeah, you went completely dark.
Well, it's got to be StreamYard, not me, because it never, nothing with me, and it's you going through the StreamYard thing. I've had that happen before. I think actually Steve was it Steve or Nikki? One of them was having that happen last night, but
yeah, you went completely dark and it booted me off.
Yeah, that's got to be StreamYard.
There's my friend Shelly. She's turned up over there in chat.
Shelly Harris.
She was with me on Bigfootville way back.
There you go. People say, "Where'd you guys meet?" Oh, Bigfootville.
Yeah. Well, actually, before that, she helped me with investigations and stuff back there in the early 2000s. Still a good friend. So
Sasquatch Wizard Adirondack says, I heard Doug Highcheck mention Velcro a few weeks ago. Well, yeah, that's what I used in, we put Velcro tabs on the ball that was being left out in the clearing. And that's primarily through the Velcro tabs is how the hairs that were left on them were collected. Another great idea with Velcro, and we'll close on this idea, is anytime you've got a fence line, whether it's barbed wire fence or a fence line that runs down an area, and it gets to the end fence, that end post where you can walk around it. At the top of that post, put Velcro in. Whether or not you got to staple it into the wood post or however you got to attach it, put Velcro on it. Because one thing that was noticed, and I can't remember if I heard this from Meldrum or somebody else, but when you see something walk down a fence line, especially a human walking down a fence line, when they get to where they don't want to cross the fence, they can see the end of it, so they're going to walk around it. They'll walk down the length of it. When they get to that last post, they set their hand on it when they go around the corner, right on top. And that's a great spot to put a Velcro tab and just go check it every few weeks. Are there hairs on it? Because if there's hairs on it, it's likely not deer or, not going to say that a raccoon couldn't have sat on top of that post or a cat, but, a hand, a wrist, an arm on top of that post as it goes around the end of that fence is something that evidently is common with human behavior when you walk around the end of a fence line. So that's a good idea. I think Velcro is a great idea to collect hair samples. But just check and say, "Oh, no hard feelings, Jay. Don't worry about that." I may not have been portraying my thoughts very well at that moment. I apologize for that. But yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I'd love to talk to you again and cover a lot of ground with you some more. So we'll have to do this again. If you're up for it. I know there's a little lag here right now.
Yeah, you keep going dark on me, Jeff.
Yeah, it's not here. It's on your end. I guarantee you. Everybody in chat was saying
maybe.
Everybody in chat was saying that it stayed fluid on this end. But anyways, appreciate you coming on, David, again. Let people know too. They can go to Amazon and find your book on Amazon, right?
Yeah, Amazon. But both of my books, Amazon.
And then Bigfoot and More is your YouTube
both
page.
of them in ebook or paperback.
Yep, and Bigfoot and More is the YouTube page, right? The channel.
Yes, Bigfoot and More is my YouTube channel.
Yeah, we encourage people to go subscribe to that. Well, all right, David, I'm going to let you go. If you want to stay backstage, we can chat for a second before after I shut the show down. But I appreciate you being on, buddy. Yeah, there's definitely a delay there. I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure it's not on this end. But again, appreciate everybody for tuning in. You can hit the like button on your way out the door. I'll thank you in advance. If you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to do so. I'm just going to look and see. I think I had, where did I put this now? Oh, I don't see it now. We had a couple new members subscribe tonight. I was going to give them a shout out, but I don't see it coming back up now. So, but anyways, thanks so much for tuning in. Next Monday morning, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. We'll be back on coffee time. And next week on Monday night, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern, we will be back with Pine Island Research here on the Untold Radio Network. And let's find an outro video right here. You guys have a great rest of your week.